Everyone, it's Patty Pond here with Calgary Arts Development. We're just bringing in the last few people, and we'll get started any second here. I'm just looking at the participants list. Oh, lots of names I recognize. Hello, welcome. Thank you all so much for joining us. I'm gonna go ahead. Welcome everyone to our Commitment to Equity virtual town hall. These three and maybe more commitments to equity town halls are part of our continuing work to center equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility into what we do to increase our own learning and understanding, and in some cases to unlearn. Of particular importance to us is our reconciliation journey, because without us reconciling with the original people of this place, and we come from a place, Walkinstis, we can't ever authentically work in the realm of equity, diversity, inclusion, and accessibility. So it is a real thrill for me that our first town hall is going to center around a conversation about truth and reconciliation. We're just so thrilled to have very special guests with us today, and these people bring a great deal of knowledge and experience and wisdom. And I am just so honored and thrilled that they were all able to join us today and share that with all of us in a good way. So before we get underway, I'd like to invite my colleague, Melissa, to go over the details of how we will work and be within this town hall today. So over to you, Melissa.
Thanks, Patty. Those of you who have been around for the last 18 months probably heard a lot of these spiels around Zoom etiquette, but we have a few things that we'd like to highlight today. So we have Nat Jelly, who is running this event for us today for the technical side. If you have any technical issues or questions around the Zoom or accessibility, please privately chat with her. She has put in the chat here that if you require multi-pin access, please privately chat with her. We also have two ASL interpreters with us, Stephanie and Deborah. If you again require the multi-pin ability to pin the interpreters, please message naturally. We do request that the audience turn their cameras off unless you're asking a question to ensure that the speakers and interpreters remain visible. And you can hide non-video participants using that little 3-dot menu in the upper corner of your video screen once you turn your camera off. If you are speaking, please remember to introduce yourselves and pause a little bit before you begin for the interpreters to indicate who you are. We're using a transcription app as well called otter.ai. Click the red box at the top of the screen if you would like to use that. If you would prefer to use the Zoom subtitles, you can also choose those. There's a live transcript button on the bottom of the Zoom screen that you can click to access those. We are recording this meeting for future reference and to share with folks who couldn't make this time work. When we release the recording, there will be an accurate transcript published as well. But again, if you would prefer not to be visible in the recording, ensure that your camera stays off. If you've joined us before, you'll know that Calgary Arts Development uses group agreements to set shared expectations and a commitment to safety and bravery in the spaces that we occupy together. Those agreements can be found in an instructions document that we'll post in the chat. At a previous town hall, the Community-Wise Anti-Racist Organizational Change Working Group shared with us their Accountable Spaces guidelines. And so today we'd like to focus on those. You can also find those guidelines in the direct link to them that we will post in the chat. So we want to share the space today. Be mindful of your speaking time, make space for others to speak and avoid interrupting others. Please keep your mics on mute when you're not speaking. Share your reactions in the chat box. If the moderator of the session is open to questions, please raise your hand either in the chat box or by using the button at the bottom of your screen. We want to recognize that each experience and viewpoint is valid, even if they differ. We want to validate experiences rather than lecturing or giving advice. Consider that you do not need to agree with a perspective in order to understand it. Speak for yourself, use I language, don't speak for others, and don't share someone else's stories or experiences. Notice your own biases and judgments and avoid making assumptions about other people. We want to examine our own privilege and be aware of potential power dynamics that we might contribute to within a space. Recognize that we're all in a place of learning. If you say something problematic, apologize, listen to the voices of others, and then learn and adjust your behavior. Be open to calling in harmful attitudes, as well as open to critical self-reflection. If an individual tells you something you said was harmful to them, listen. Use these situations not to harass or call out, but as learning experience. And finally, take care of yourself. Think of someone you trust whom you can debrief with and plan to contact them. It's okay if you need to leave the room at any time. In addition to these accountable spaces guidelines, I also want to state that we recognize that asking people to share in this space is a request that requires emotional labor and vulnerability. Calgary Arts Development commits to the promise that there'll be no retribution against people for the stories and perspectives that they share, and we ask that all participants commit to the same. Any participants who use harmful or disrespectful language or who are actively disregarding the group agreements will be asked to leave the town hall. If they choose not to leave, we will remove you. Please privately chat with Sherry McMaster, who is supporting today's town hall as an active bystander if you feel uncomfortable or unsafe or see that a participant is using harmful or offensive language. I'd like to invite Sherry to introduce yourself so that people can find your screen and see who you are. Oh, Sherry, sorry, you're muted.
Thanks, Melissa. Sorry about that. Good afternoon. This is Sherry speaking. Thank you very much for having me in your space today, in the space here. I've been asked, as Melissa has indicated, to act as the active bystander for today's conversation. The term bystander effect refers to the phenomenon where the greater number of people that are present, the less likely people are to help someone who is in distress. And it is believed that this happens, that the behavior in others strengthens the bystander effect. So when people remain passive, others too remain passive. However, if others exhibit active reactions, then the bystander effect may be reduced. And therefore, an individual is more likely to help someone when someone else has initiated action. So the active bystander is a person who witnesses an emergency or power-based violence, recognizes it, takes it upon themselves to do something about it. And as bystanders, we need to be especially vigilant and aware of what disrespect, harassment, racism, and hate violence look like in order to stand up and intervene when people need it the most. So as Melissa indicated, if you feel uncomfortable or safe, or if you feel that the group agreements that have been outlined or the accountable spaces guidelines are not being respected, please feel free to privately message me here today. And part of my role as the active bystander is to help make sure that we're collectively adhering to those agreements. As Melissa indicated, participants who break the agreements will be contracted by me and if necessary, removed from today's discussion. So I look forward to hearing the conversation today. And again, thank you for being here and for sharing your stories today. Thanks very much.
This is Melissa speaking again. Thank you, Sherry, so much. So we'll be opening the floor for questions after our guests share their thoughts. Again, if you'd like to speak, you can use the reactions button at the bottom of your screen to raise your hand or indicate that you'd like to share in the chat. You can also put questions directly in the chat, as Leslie from our team will be collecting questions and watching for raised hands. Again, if you have any questions or challenges with the technology, please privately chat with Natalie. And I will pass it back to Patty.
Many thanks, Melissa and Sherry, for giving us that information and helping us, again, hold this session in a good way. This is Patty speaking. And before I hand over to our moderator and host for today's conversation, as I said earlier, it's a really important time. These Commitment to Equity town halls are actually the second in a series of town halls that we started last summer when we hosted 5 anti-racism town halls. And as we all know, things become heightened in a moment when something happens like the murder of George Floyd. And then life goes on and things just kind of go by the wayside. And it was really important to us that we continue to host a series of these kinds of conversations so that all of us in our communities could continue to learn. And as I said, unlearn sometimes, and make sure that these conversations and that the people who have been impacted and affected and harmed are never forgotten. And so, as I said, I'm thrilled to have CADA hosting these town halls again this year. We chose to rename the town halls our Commitment to Equity. And it's not that we won't talk about anti-racism or racism. I'm sure you'll hear a lot about it today, as a matter of fact. However, we wanted to also have these town halls be an act of our commitment. And in doing so, one way I want to demonstrate our act of commitment is by introducing you to our hostess for today's conversation, Sable Sweetgrass. Sable has been with us here at Calgary Arts Development for a few years now, going on a few years now. However, Sable, as an artist in her own right, is got a body of work that goes back many years, and her commitment to this community, not only as an artist, but also as a champion for the arts and an advocate for the arts, and particularly Indigenous arts and artists, goes back a long time in our community. And today it's my great pleasure actually to publicly introduce Sable in her role as Director of Indigenous Engagement and Reconciliation. Sable is joining our leadership team already in her first little bit of time with us as a member of the senior team. Her wisdom and expertise and patience has made a difference to me already. And so I'm so thrilled that our organization has caught up to the life experience, to the knowledge, to the expertise that Sable has brought not only to Calgary Arts Development, but to many organizations prior. It was a thrill for me to be able to announce her appointment not only today, but previously to our staff and board. So welcome, Sable, and over to you to host the rest of our time today. Thank you very much. That's my final thought.
Thank you so much, Patty. Wow, it was, it's been quite a couple of weeks, and so excited to be in this new role with Calgary Arts Development. In the past few years has been seeing so many exciting changes and developments for the Indigenous arts community here in Mohkinstsis and throughout Southern Alberta. And we're just getting started when it comes to Calgary Arts Development, but there's so much more going on in our community. We have so many artists, so many Indigenous artists from Treaty 7 First Nations, from Métis Region 3, Inuit artists. We have an Inuit gallery, Transformations Arts Gallery, and First Nations people from all across Turtle Island who call Mohkinstsis home. And so I'm so proud of the work that we are doing with Calgary Arts Development and addressing the needs of the Indigenous arts community here. So thank you so much. All right, so I'm going to do a land acknowledgement and then introduce our elder today from Kainai. So for everyone, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome. Welcome to our town hall and our talk around truth and reconciliation in the arts. Today we are here, I'm here in my ancestors' traditional territory in Mohkinstsis and Southern Alberta. Here we have the three signatories to Treaty Number 7 in September of 1877, the Blackfoot, which is the Siksika, Kainai, which is where I'm from, and the Piikani, as well as the Tsuut'ina Nation, which is just on the southwest edge of the city here, and the Stoney Nakoda people, which is Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley. And we're so glad to have you here with us. As I said, we have so many First Nations from across Turtle Island who call this home, and as well as the Métis Nation Region 3 that also is situated here in Calgary, Mohkinstsis. So, I would like to now introduce our elder for today's gathering. This is Rose Talani, Rose Heavyhead, and Talani's name in English, which I have difficulty pronouncing in Blackfoot, is Dividing Thunder. So thank you so much, Rose, for joining us.
Okay, 8 times to go. Hello and good day. I'm here. I'm glad to be invited and to join your meeting today and help you with the prayer. So I will light the smudge right now. And I'm from Kainai. Kainai is Southern Alberta Blackfoot tribe. Kainai means many chiefs. So that's where I'm from, and I'm Two-Spirit. I help the Two-Spirit community quite a bit when they call me to come and do prayers. And within the past 2 summers, I've been helping with sweat lodges for Two-Spirit and their family and our friends. So I'll just do a prayer right now. Ayo natin suwat ayo kimat di kinanamuistiko. Ayos pumu kinanakanas kinapsam istiko. Ayo natin siwa. Mr. Nyokai kitkumi. Ayo nasik kay sopwa. Ayo kistu kitamu istiko kanasukaps. Kimatusan si tapia Mohkinstsi niksukom. Kimatusa sikutan ansi sukut sikskio kitana. Sukum exam si tapia Mohkinstsi kita kamix. Kimatu saya amu istiku amu kena penananak si uyuk penanamu tak bukti. Niksuka sebo mats knipat ka it's the bitska sim. Sepumusah kena suka pesan suh buka bukti musah kayak kimutsia sukut stepe mutsio penananan espomutsio penananan. Ayo itu mitepi kita awan ekspenanan lah kai kat mitu penanat semut sekali. Okay, kimutsio pinan, spumutsio pinan. Stababi, ukits books pinanan ansi matstiki, matabi napi gwegs, sixapi gwegs, gansi apataps tiniman. Gansi matstiki, ititapi, hayo kimutsio pinan. Esukuts the bimutsio pinanake is the wapso pinanan batapitsini. And okay, kisochtiki. Uke xisuku six nitui. Sochti ake kimutsio pinananan. Ake kitsi pinanamo xakumiti. Kiamo. Oh, need dikes. Kiansi abstitamio pinanan. Ake kitsi pinan kiansi mistaki. Ake kitsi pinananan. Ake kami isami batapio pinan kiansi matstiki. The three peak six. Okay, kimanananan. Okay, ayos siya to pinan itu mit pin nasik sawan ikinanan. Okay, ikitsi pinanansi. Na three peaks kansi at smooth skanya itu mit si pinananan. Ako testo wap so pinanabat pitsi an okay. Kisocht. Okay. Done now. So I pray in Blackfoot. My mother-in-law, our elder Atan, she said that we pray in our own language that we were given by Creator, because in that language there's a spirit in that language, and it strengthens your prayers and your life and the people that you're praying for too. So that's what. And I just prayed about all of the people that live in Mohkinstsi and all the different races of people that Creator put on earth, that we all understand each other well, and that we get along well and care and have compassion and caring for each other, and put prayer first. Native people, we put prayer first. It helps the other areas in our life of our, in the medicine wheel has the physical, emotional, and mental. And and the medicine wheel also has the 4 races of people. And so it's kind of like a puzzle, and then we come together and we learn from each other, because we all have sacred and powerful ways Creator gave us to use in our lives, but we share that with each other. And this way, we live in harmony with our lives now and into the future for our future generations. Hey.
Thank you so much, Rose. Thank you for that powerful
You're
prayer.
welcome.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
So today is a really special day for me, because for all of us, coming together, especially with this particular group of artists that we have lined up to speak. These are 4 leaders in the Indigenous arts community here in Calgary in Southern Alberta. And just reflecting this past couple of weeks since I shifted roles, and thinking how far that we have come in this community in establishing Indigenous arts here in Mohkinstsis. It has been a battle. It's been a battle. It's been a real challenge since I can remember, and it's been 2 steps forward, 10 steps back, and then sometimes a huge leap forward. I really got into the Indigenous art scene when I joined the Calgary Aboriginal Arts Awareness Society, and one of my mentors, the late Joan Cardinal Schubert, really was able to teach me about everything that came before here in the city, and also connecting with my elders from the Blackfoot Confederacy when I worked with the Glenbow Museum as they were putting together the Blackfoot exhibit on the third floor of the Glenbow Museum. And it made me realize that Indigenous arts goes way back before the signing of Treaty 7. And but we really sort of just focus on what has been done recently. We never really think about how far it actually goes back. And so now I see, the way I see things is that we're sort of starting again. We're reestablishing, and we have so many Indigenous communities here in Mohkinstsis and in Southern Alberta, such a rich diversity of communities and artists of all practices. We're so very lucky, and so we have three of these artists who are here today. And the first is that we'll be talking is Cowboy Smith. Cowboy Smith is from Piikani Nation, and Cowboy is well, Cowboy, he wears many hats. He is a filmmaker. He is a writer. He studied theater. He's worked with Making Treaty 7. He was in the documentary Elder in the Making, and also the Red X Talks, which was very similar to TEDx Talks, but a focus on Indigenous leaders and knowledge keepers presenting to the community. Our other speaker is Kelly Morningbull, and Kelly Morningbull has been a leader here as well for quite some time. She's currently a design lead at the Calgary Public Library. She is in charge of the Calgary placemaking, Indigenous placemaking, which is getting artists involved in putting sculptures and murals all over Calgary within the Calgary Public Library. Kelly was integral to the establishment or the development of the new central library when it was about to open. And Kelly herself is a filmmaker from Piikani Nation, and her film Treaty Money was a short film, and she's also done principal photography for a short film that I did. Both her and I took a course through Herland Film a few years back. So I'm really excited to have Kelly join us today. And then Troy Emery Twig, who is, I would say, one of our knowledge keepers and one of our elders in the arts as well. Troy has worked with the late Michael Green and our late elder Narcissus Blood to bring artists together for Making Treaty 7 back in 2012. And so we all know the impact that Making Treaty 7 had and continues to have in our community. Troy is a choreographer and a dancer. He works all across Canada and has worked for the Center for Indigenous Theatre in Toronto, as well as many productions across Canada. So I'm really excited to have them here to share their thoughts, their ideas, and their vision of the future of Indigenous arts. to address truth and reconciliation in Indigenous arts here in Mohawk in Southern Alberta. I'd also like to introduce Jarrett, two young men who I'm hoping will be able to join us here. Jarrett is from the Stoney Nakoda Nation, and he is a filmmaker. He heads up the Stoney Nakoda Youth Animation Project and works with a lot of young Stoney Nakoda youth in helping to develop their careers as filmmakers and artists. He's a leader in his community and also a leader within our community as well. So I'm hoping that he'll be able to join us today. He's a new dad, he's a new father, and he's currently filming, so he's very busy, but I'm hoping that he'll be able to join us. So I would really like to start with Cowboy first, and then with Kelly, Morning Bull, and then Troy, Twig. Each speaker will have 10 to 15 minutes to share their thoughts. Like I said, their thoughts, ideas of Indigenous arts here in the city, and as well as truth and reconciliation. So Cowboy, you there?
Okay.
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 Good to see you.
Thank you for that introduction. Thank you. So we have 10 minutes now where we do our little spiel right now, and then we dissect it later.
Yes.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, Niksikawa, Nistuanago Kikakskitawa. Itamik. Good morning to those of you who are just waking up this afternoon. And good afternoon to all of my peers out there. Honored to be on the same panel as Troy and Kelly and Jarrett, fellow artists who I have nothing but love for and respect for. And also shout out to Rose for that beautiful prayer. It's always good to hear those prayers in our language, in the Niitsitapi language. And the shout out to my grandmother at Dunn, who was a huge influence on me, the late Margaret Heinemann. She was, one of my mentors in the cultural side of things with the Blackfoot culture. And I got to spend every, Thanksgiving, Christmas, and special holiday with her. One of the really beautiful things that I learned from my grandmother at Dunn was I was always perplexed as a kid by her prayers. The length of her prayers would be something to the tune of 45 minutes to an hour. And I had no idea what, she was saying most of the prayer, but what she was actually doing when she was praying, she had a specific sort of moment and focus for every single person in the room at all of our family gatherings. And I think we kind of forget that that kind of love and care is often not a welcome thing in spaces where we have to rush and hurry up and stay on time and check off all these boxes. So I remember our family having to call everybody to dinner before dinner was even finished being cooked. And I can remember all of those prayers, and you kind of go into like a trance state when you're listening to these prayers with some of these elders, and that took me back. So thank you for that prayer. It's been a tricky time, and for all of you who've been following the news, and I guess it's not really a news story anymore. We as Indigenous people are confronted yet again by the colonial machinations that predicate what happened with the residential school situation, which was, of course, as you know, a lot of you know, the numbers keep increasing. I believe there's only 21 schools that have been searched, and we're already the number out there is north of 6,000. And a lot of these numbers are coming from the generation of our grandparents and a lot of their peers that they didn't see come home are part of that, a part of those statistics. And again, it's disheartening to see that the news cycles have sort of abandoned this story. Collective amnesia is kicked in once again. But we can't forget it, because these intergenerational traumas that have been inflicted on us by way of genocide in this country, they're palpable. We feel them every day. We're politicized in every situation we walk into. I still walk into a place like Canadian Tire, and I'm like, getting followed around, and I'm a big, like 6'4" Indigenous man, very Indigenous looking. I'm OG, and I still, we still have, these types of things. We're still confronted by these things. We still have to do things like code switching just to be taken seriously, and we have to overachieve to a point where we're doing 10 times better than our non-Indigenous settler counterparts. And that of course is an emotional labor that's very taxing, and we're constantly educating people. We're constantly trying to navigate the fragilities and the lack of capacity of non-Indigenous audiences and people that we come across even in casual conversation. So it's been a mission and a half just to maintain our focus and do the things we love in the arts, and still navigate through this game of snakes and ladders, where there are way more snakes than there are ladders for us to climb. So I want to take this opportunity to acknowledge the great work CADA has done, Calgary Arts Development. Sable's been in the thick of it, being a great leader for our community. She's always been a great leader, a great collaborator. I want to acknowledge all of the great work Sable has done in the spirit of equity and reconciliation processes that are going on. The Original Peoples Investment Program is something we all developed together, and I'm proud to say that hundreds of thousands of dollars have gone towards Indigenous projects. Where back in my whippersnapper years, we were lucky to get like a piece of fry bread and some stew at one of these gatherings somewhere. So come a long way, and Calgary Arts Development's done a great job in making sure we have a seat at the table, but also a voice, and we're actually influencing the decisions that are being made moving forward. And having autonomy and sovereignty in our work is huge. And CADA's been very hands off. The OPIC program's been great. I still feel like some of the institutions in this city still have a long way to go. And part of it is not totally their fault, but part of it is their fault. Bureaucracy is something that it's like a weird gluten allergy that we can't quite pin down. It just kind of sticks around and slows everything down, and throws a micro. Oh, who's that? Someone's mic is on. I think I got someone in the audience laughing. But to come back to like the state of affairs, there's no grand unified theory on what reconciliation looks like right now. For some people who do work at an institution level, it's been good. For more independent artists like myself, we've had our ups and downs. I think the reconciliation era is as volatile as the cryptocurrency market. So we're still trying to find our way. It's difficult when we're being re-traumatized every week with another school reporting its numbers on what happened in that time. And we're doing our best to try and continue to stay focused and tell stories, do the things we love to do, whether it's in film and dance, theater, writing. Like, we just want to tell stories. At the end of the day, we're all storytellers. We all witnessed our families' stories growing up, our community stories, our elders' stories, and we're trying to set a new bar. We're trying to set a new precedent. There's some really exciting things coming up with new technologies and in places like the crypto space. CADA, I'm happy to say I'm working with CADA on a really cool NFT project in a blockchain space for cryptocurrencies. Tapping into the possibilities of Indigenous futurisms and how we can take the very traditional ancestral reverberations and make them contemporary, make them relevant, and make them palpable, make them accessible, make them digestible for people. And one of the cool things, I'll end with this, I don't want to take up too much time here, but I'll end with like a reminder that where we are now in Treaty 7 territory in Inishtsi country, our inception story is about working together, different people from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, working together, supporting each other, helping each other through things like a pandemic. At the time in 1877, when we did sign treaty, we were dealing with smallpox, measles epidemics, the ecocide of the buffalo, our staple food source at the time. We're dealing with so much, and of course settlers who were not used to the harsh winters in this area. The original goal and intent, spirit and intent of the treaty was for all of us to work together. And if that's your inception story, if that is our genesis story, that's a pretty cool story. And I think we need to remind ourselves that the Treaty 7 story is unique to Calgary and Southern Alberta. Edmonton doesn't have this, Vancouver doesn't have this, Toronto doesn't have this story. That pipe ceremony that took place on September 22nd, 1877 at Blackfoot Crossing is where it all began. And now we're at a time where we really do need to step up and support each other in this very difficult time. And I really believe that organizations like CADA and many other great organizations in the Treaty 7 area, just, you need to it's time to take a back seat and let the Indigenous people lead, because lived experience crushes any PhD, NFT, or KFC you might have in your back pocket, because of the nuances and complexities that we face as Indigenous people, and because of the frequencies of the land that we carry in our culture and how we view the world. I've always said that our cultural protocols are the original OG ancestral means of harm reduction. And right now, a lot of people are going through a difficult time, a lot of anxiety about what's happening with the pandemic, a lot of depression, a lot of people losing jobs, a lot of people being forced to make decisions about their body with the vaccine. And I think a lot of that old world, that ancestral lexicon and way of knowing, that's something that we need to tap back into and share, the power of those ancestral frequencies with everybody in this territory, and stay true to what the treaty was all about. And with that, that's my spiel. Hopefully we can have a good conversation the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cowboy. Yes, I forgot to mention that Cowboy was one of the original advisory for Calgary Arts Development when they were putting together the Original Peoples Investment Program. And so Cowboy and I was also part of that. I'm trying to remember all the other names involved. There was quite a few, including the late Dene artist, Chris Akart, Melanie Parsons was there from Savage Rose, and my mind just went blank, but there was a lot of great artists involved in the development of the Original Peoples Investment Program, and Cowboy was one of them. So thank you so much, Cowboy. And yeah, so thank you for that. Thank you for your wisdom, and I'd like to now move it to Kelly Morningbull. Hey, Kelly, are you there?
Hello, I'm here.
Yeah, so Kelly is currently, as I mentioned, board of directors for MT7, and you're also with the Calgary Public Library and the placemaking with Calgary Public Library. So thank you so much for joining us. I know you're very busy.
Thank you. Thank you, Sable, for inviting me today. Hello to my fellow peers, Cowboy and Troy. I want to give thanks to Rose for the blessing or to start our session off, and to Patty and the team for allowing for hosting these sessions. They're so important for our community, so that we can learn how to work together in, the most positive but impactful way. I guess where my journey sort of started, I've been living in the city for just over 15 years. And I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I didn't know if I wanted to be an artist. I struggled a lot with that, about calling myself an artist, just because I wasn't fully immersed in it. I was still, dabbling in it. And I didn't really see opportunities for me to exist in the Calgary art community, and which was a real sort of setback for me, and just dealing with a lot of insecurities and lack of confidence and things like that. And so I guess where I sort of put my mark was to participate in different types of boards. And so my first experience with a board was through the Aboriginal Friendship Center of Calgary, where I actually learned that my grandfather and my grandmother were one of the sort of co-developers that brought the Indian Friendship Center here back in the early 1950s. And that was something that was never shared with me growing up. I didn't really know a lot about my family from Siksika, because my parents had raised us down in Bigunny, and that's where I sort of lived my entire life until I was about 21. And so I started to explore that side of myself, that identity, and learned the different things, movements that my grandparents were a part of. My grandfather was chief of Siksika back in the 1950s, and and I didn't know a lot of these things, and so I really started to explore my own identity as a Niitsitapi, and and what that meant for me living in a big city. And I'm not in any way tall as Cowboy. He's 6'4", I'm 5'2". We grew up together since we were like 4. I will just point that out. And so I really struggled a lot when I was trying to enter into the art scene and trying to find my place, and and seeing all of these really great Indigenous artists. Cowboy included was a part of that group that I'd watch from afar, and I would was just in such awe that they could step outside the box and were super confident, and were making art. And but at the time too, I was a single parent, I was a young mother, so a lot of my decision making was around being a parent and making the right decisions for my son to support him in a different sort of way. And then I finished school, and I started to explore a little bit more. I had eventually left the Friendship Center board, but then I wanted to look at how I can make change, where I can voice my opinion. I was starting to sort of come into my own self as an artist, and there was an opening with M Media Productions as a board member. And so I took that opportunity, and that was back in 2013. And surprisingly enough, I'm still a part of that board and have been since then. And, and just trying to encourage other Indigenous filmmakers, especially youth, to explore that side of them, to provide a platform, provide space, because we didn't have a lot of space to go and create. And, but even then there's those challenges of being in, because we're, as Indigenous people, we're so connected to the land, and that's where we get a lot of our inspiration, that being in in an institution wasn't as creative. And I think a lot of artists in general can reciprocate, or can understand what that was like, or what that is like. And so, for me, it was just trying to create spaces for everybody else except for myself, because I just wanted people to have an opportunity to be who they are, to explore their indigeneity, to connect with themselves, to not have to hide a piece of who they are because they're Indigenous. And I think that's a lot of that struggle with identity. It resonates with a lot of Indigenous people and communities, because we were raised in shame. And even if we had great parents, great families, support, all of that, there was still this shame that came with it because of your peers that you often were around. I grew up on my reserve, but I also went my entire grade school in a white community. And so that shifted a lot of the ways that I think, a lot of how I deal with, or how I work with non-Indigenous people. And, and I think in this time of reconciliation, there needs to be that level of understanding, of who we are as Indigenous people, and to bring yourself down to, or bring yourself up to our level and understand where we're coming from, and some of the challenges that we face, the nuances, as Cowboy alluded to, that we face on a daily basis, and that, we can't just be Indigenous artists. We have to carry the trauma from our families. We have to carry, the addictions that come with it. Whether it's not even ours, it's still connected to us in some way, and that sometimes stops us from expressing and developing and really being true to who we are as Indigenous people because of that intergenerational trauma. And so with making Treaty 7, it was, it's the same sort of space. Well, it was different because making Treaty 7 was all Indigenous. And when I first joined the board, there was all of these, really great people who were all working towards the same sort of idea, the same concept. And that was to share stories. And that was to preserve our stories, but to also tell our stories from our perspective, because for a long time we weren't able to do that. And it was always had to come from a non-Indigenous perspective, or there had to be some sort of collaboration, which is why I think a lot of us would encourage people just to continue to train, continue to get educated, continue to speak your voice when you see injustices happening, whether they're in front of you or you hear them from your peers. I don't step back and listen, like, say something, because sometimes people don't know some of the challenges that we face. And when you have to explain that all the time, it's, not only is it a release for you, but it's also helping non-Indigenous people to understand where we're coming from. And sometimes that could be draining and taxing, and so there is that level of responsibility for both parties to come together, and that's what Cowboy's talking about, going back to our needs to be ways. How are we going to work together in order to make ethical spaces for everybody to come, share, and learn? And, I'm all about education, providing spaces, representation, visible representation, as well as systemic change, because that's where a lot of the challenges come from, is within. And, you can stand outside and you can protest all you want, but sometimes you need to find people that are within the system to help you make those changes. And sometimes they come from non-Indigenous people. And so that relational piece is so important to reconciliation, because without it, there's no trust, there's no change. And so I'm just going to stop there because I think I'm going to go on a bit of a tangent, and I'm going to avoid any of that. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. All right, awesome. Thank you. And yes, Kelly and I both started we worked on a film together, which was with Herland, and that was so much fun. I wish I could do that again. And but then we both started at the Calgary Public Library, the old Central Library, and then moved to the new Central Library. So that was really exciting, especially when they announced the placemaking that was going to be Indigenous placemaking that was going to take place, and so Kelly was a really integral part of that. So, and it still continues to this day. So thank you so much, Kelly. Our next speaker is Troy Emery Twig. Troy, are you there?
Yes, I am. Sorry, I was just having trouble with these little buttons on my phone.
All right, yeah. So looking forward to hearing your thoughts and yeah.
Cool. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Patty and Kata, for providing this platform and space and this round circle. I'm honored to be on this panel with my fellow colleagues, Kelly and Cowboy and Jarrett. Sable, congratulations on, you were always a leader in my eyes, and I'm so happy for you, and happy for the community that you are in that position. Also, thank you to the elder Rose. Thank you for that beautiful prayer. And yeah, I'm honored to be here. I'm home on the homeland at last. The pandemic has been really constricting in terms of travel, and of course, keeping safe and stuff. And but the resiliency of the artwork going out in the communities has kept this boy busy. Of course, a lot of it is on Zoom. I just recently got back from Toronto when I found a window of opportunity, and came home to see my family, and then flew back. I was in Julia Eplin's dance film that was produced by Moonhorse Dance Theatre. And I'm so honored to still be working. In my 50 years here, I've had a career of 25 years. And I'm from the Gaina Blackfoot Reserve. And but it's just been amazing. I mean, Jupiter Theatre called, and they wanted something for their podcast series, which I was very honored to be part of. Marshall Viel, who many of you might know, he's a young up-and-comer Blackfoot artist, was the actor who played 6 actors in my play, and Renalta Arlook, who is the Indigenous director of Indigenous Arts at the Bath Center, directed it. And we never saw each other, but when it all came together, and with the sound design and everything, and when I heard this, I was just blown away. It's like, those are my words, and here they are, listening to this. And so I'm really, it just restored my faith and again, the resiliency of what people can do and how they can keep you busy. One of my friends from Toronto, her name is Terrell McGuire, says, Troy, we cannot forget the magic. We just cannot forget the magic of what it is we do in terms of theater. And this made me really nervous. And I thought, okay, if I'm going to lift the land in this new play that I'm working with Quest Theatre, we're working on a Blackfoot story, The Girl Who Lost Her Buffalo. How do we don't know where the pandemic is going to take us. So we're thinking fast, adapting fast. How are we going to lift the land if we're going to have to do this outside? And and I'm just like, no, I'm not doing anything from Zoom, because first of all, I'm very, technically not oriented, and so so I wanted to do it the way it was meant to be done. And so I'm thankful for continuing to work as an artist, because that's who I am. And I was listening to, I was looking actually at Sable's notes the other day, and when she was talking about truth and reconciliation, I mean, there's a lot of stories about truth and reconciliation. There's a lot of stories about appropriation. There's a lot of experience in combining both experiences to work in a really, really meaningful way. And that's where a lot of work has begun in just that time alone, which can take weeks, which can take months. And in the beginning of Making Treaty 7, when it came out of the Cultural Capital of Canada, and Michael wanted to do a legacy project, and when he called me, I was living in Toronto at the time, and called me. We were sitting at a restaurant in Chinatown in downtown Calgary, and he was talking about a reenactment. He needed to get going, and many of you know who he is, and if you don't keep up to him, you're left behind, but he needed to get going. And I said to him, you know what, I'm going to introduce you to someone who you're absolutely going to fall in love with. So I brought him up to Alvin and Narcissus Blood's teepee, and immediately they hit it off. And I knew they would. Narcissus was work with me navigating this. I was at York University doing an MA degree in dance, and through it all, like my advisors, like the whole thing was Bunheads and Martha Graham, and through Michael and through other people like Terrell and Joan Cardinal Schubert, and so many people in the beginning, Everett Soup, all these people that came before me, taught me in a way that I can break the rules. But first of all, like, discipline is so important that you can tell your own story in your own way. And I just came out of theater school in Fort McMurray at Keanu College School of Visual and Performing Arts, and landed in Calgary. And my first gig was at Alberta Theatre Projects, and it was Marriott Sluter's play, Spinster Girl the Musical. Mark Bellamy was directing, and I was like nervous as hell, but worked through it. And to navigate through these systems and to look at yourself, and even with theater history, you know, I was like, okay, you know, I get it, you know, the whole development, you know, and how artists, you know, reflect of the political climate and what's happening around them, like Shakespeare, you know, Michelangelo, the Italians, you know, the French Revolution, Industrial Revolution, and, you know, and I'm like, when do me and my people come in? When do my people come in? So this 18-year-old just starting to tell my own story, and realizing, you know, the birth of that was in the beginning of contemporary art. I just got out of a meeting with Dance Collection Dance, and a young dancer from the Winnipeg Contemporary Dancers, Royal Winnipeg Dancers. He's a ballet dancer, and he's coming into his own, discovering his identity as an Indigenous person, and hearing, you know, some of the elders speak, and really listening when they say the rivers and the land will come and get you if you belong. And, you know, he was you know, really connecting, and he asked me the question, what is Indigenous contemporary dance? And I had to think about it, and I thought, and this is where we come together, you know, in terms of reconciliation. Contemporary Indigenous thought, dance is, so I said to him, it's contemporary dance, but you're applying the experience. You're applying the experience and bringing your own knowledge as a trained body and the trained voice. You use that in creating work and collaborating, so that you have that language together when you come together in order to work together. And getting back to Narcissus, he worked with me, and he says, you have something to teach. You come from somewhere, you know, always remember that. And he became part of my advisor in terms of the work that I was doing. And when I came home, way before making Treaty 7, we were working on a project. I was working with Anne Flynn from the University of Calgary Dance Department, and Lisa Doolittle, University of Lethbridge, in the theater department. And this is when the work that I really realized began, you know, in terms of reconciliation work, in terms of how we build meaningful relationships together. And Narcissus was a huge part of that. And I call him a knowledge keeper. And he became an elder in our ceremonial Okagatsin is what we call it. And for the English term of it is Sundance. He would often talk about how if we're going to meet in the middle, how it can never be just one-sided. And so he began to connect me with elders, and many of those elders that we were working with are no longer here. They passed on into the happy hunting grounds. But we worked on a project, and it took time. And I realized the time that it took, because they were building meaningful relationships. And I always remember Lisa Doolittle saying this, you know, she says, you know, like, and I appreciate, you know, the whole, you know, traditional way of traditional research, but she had her, you know, her clipboard and set of questions, and the camera was set up. And I think it was Adam Delaney that we were interviewing. And he was sitting there, and her first question was, you know, introduce yourself, tell me who you are. He introduced himself in Blackfoot. Then he began this story, and it was 3 hours long. And he kept going. And one of the things that she said to me was she realized that stories are alive. When you hear these elders speak, you hear the land in which they come from. And she said, every time I go back to that interview, because it was recorded, there's always something new. It gave me everything that we needed for the project, but there's always something new. And so we had to learn about protocols. What do we do? And this is what I was told by the elders was, when you go and seek out knowledge, I'm not going to use the word traditional. I try not to do that, but knowledge, you have to give it back to the community. And the way you do that is make it accessible to to the youth, to the children. And so we began to work and, building this community relationship, building meaningful relationships. That process took about 3 months before we went on to continue on. But it also shifted it because it was all of us, and with the help of Lisa Doolittle and Anne Flynn and their connection to the project, and it was a SSHRC grant that happened, and then my connection to my community, building that meaningful relationship, we ended up, creating a work called Colonial Theatrics in Canada, Managing Blackfoot Dance during Western Expansion, which is published in the Oxford Handbook of Dance and Theatre. And when I got my copy, I was looking at it and I was going, wow, all these elders are no longer with us, but their words are here. And this can be accessible to the whole world. And we also did a project where we went presented in Seattle at the Society of Dance History Scholars and the CORD, which is the Congress of Research of Dance, performing negotiations, Blackfoot Dance Spectacle, the Colony and Multicultural Canada, 1870 to 2010. And Red Crow College was still standing, which is the old residential school. It burnt down a couple of years ago. But we gathered in there with all the elders and we brought food and we feasted. And then we did a ceremony where we handed the knowledge back to the elders, which was really emotional, but it was mutually respected. And that's where I started to learn, okay, there's something in this. Indigenizing the process isn't just giving tobacco and then running away with your agenda or whatever it is that you're going to do. There is a process of connecting. We didn't use the words reconciliation at the time, even when working with Michael and the Cultural Capital of Canada and the elders. And for the first time in many, many years, probably like the century, had we had that many elders. I mean, he worked really hard to bring elders from the Treaty 7 community together and put them all up at the Carriage House Hotel. And we all went down to Heritage Park and we all feasted together. And we had a round table, much like what is happening now. And it was Frank Weaselhead. The second day, he stood up and he said, "Where are all the white people? This is the first day. Where are all of them? All us elders see each other, but you come one day, you take what you need and you leave. And all of us are here. And you brought us here for 2 days." And Michael put his head down and he said to me, "This is going to change. This is going to change." And he brought a team of 15 producers from all over the world. They came here to my house. They were sitting in the back till we were ready to go out. And they came and they camped at the Sundance for 15 days. And he built the trust of, that's building the meaningful relationship. He built the trust of the elders, Pete, standing alone, would tell me in Blackfoot, your friend, the one with the nose and the black hat, you go get him and, tell him to sit here. We're going to have a visit, That's how much they respected him, and bringing our international colleagues, to the Sundance. And Beverly Hungry Wolf gave them a teepee, and they were guests of Narcissus and Elvine. And I'd go there to check up on them every day because I was teaching at the partnership with University of Lethbridge and the Center for Indigenous Theatre. But it was so nice to see them engaged, helping put a teepees. They were part of the community. And then I think about what Frank said, and that's building meaningful relationships, And he told me when we were working with Marlene Miller and Philip Spohr with Movement Perpetuel from Montreal, and we were filming the Byron Chiefmood documentary. And he said to me, he says, "You bring your artist's friend here to Okokatsin." He goes, "Then they'll know that this ceremony, this dance piece lasted for 11,000 years. They're seeing something that has been part of this land for that long." And of recently, my collaboration with the Canadian Academy of Mask and Puppetry, I continue to honor that, in terms of my collaboration, so that we can honor that space before we go off into our project. Because sometimes in that space, we discover something that is, and I'll use the word reconciliation, but that we find in there and move forward. And in Nisga'a, it was Peter Bothwell and Ian McFarlane and Geneviève Pierre. They came in and they slept in the teepee. Raymond Manybears provided them a teepee, and I remember the wind. Remember the wind that night. They were helping hunker down, some of the elders' teepees and stuff, and really engaged in the community. So, coming together to work in that, especially on the land, then we can continue to move forward and continue to produce, whether it's the text, whether, like if those of you who've seen Making Treaty 7, I mean, it was 3 hours long, and then we created a children's version that lasted 3 years, and that it wasn't built to travel, but it did because that's how demanded it was. And then we even got a Dora Award nomination from Toronto for best production and for theater for young audience division, which was great. And then continuing to move on. So getting to your question about moving forward, and through that experience, my experience through this is yes, building those meaningful relationships is very, very key. And it's starting with CADA, with this platform that we continue to engage, we continue to learn, we continue to grow. And working right now with the Blackfoot language, we're working with Tank Standing Buffalo and Adrian Stimson and Lance Tailfeathers and Christine Cook from Calgary Animated Object Society, and a Blackfoot language animated film that we got funded from the Canada Council for the Arts and CADA, which is going lovely, and a new production with Quest. And again, we're indigenizing the process by bringing the artists to the land, working with the elders, working with the knowledge, and then we get the technical aspects of their expertise pushing in, and we meet on that mutual ground. And I'll end it there. Thank you for your time. I hope that some of this information was useful to you, and I appreciate hearing your comments and stuff. And like Cowboy says, let's have a great discussion. Thank you for your time, everyone. It's an honor to be here.
Thank you so much, Troy, and for sharing. There's so much history in Indigenous arts here in Mohkinstsis to share that I think a lot of people most people are not aware of. And for me, MT7 was one of the first times I can think of that such a collaboration happened between non-Indigenous and Indigenous coming together, and through Michael and Narcissus' leadership came together and just made something so beautiful. But I think what people were not really aware of, that even behind the scenes of that, there were difficulties, as there is in anything. And somehow, we overcome those difficulties as a team, as a group, and following the guidance of our elders, following the guidance of Narcissus and Beverly, and just such a beautiful production that came together that ended up influencing a whole generation of people in here in Calgary, after, I don't think anything's been the same ever since MT7, but there's still even more history behind that, and now we talk about the youth, and that this knowledge and has to be shared. And these resources need to be shared with the youth. And we have so many young people in this city today who, many of whom are artists and are looking for those opportunities. And there are probably a lot more opportunities than we had when we were around their age here in the city. And I grew up here in Calgary, and my experience of the arts in the city was usually things starting and then being taken down. So whether it was the Plains Indian Cultural Survival School, which was a school that had huge murals on the outside of the school, on the inside of the school, where they taught bustle making, music, dance, all, you know, it was really an art school. And then that was taken down literally. Or else the Calgary Aboriginal Arts Awareness Society, which was an organization not too long ago that advocated on behalf of Indigenous artists here in the city, and taken down during the Bronconnier years. And so looking forward, what do we need to do, and what do we need to accomplish, and in order for our young people to be able to thrive in this city and in this arts scene. So I think what we'll do now is, because I wish we had more time, but maybe we can open it up to questions if there are any questions at the moment. Sorry, I can't see. Is there, if you have any questions, either post it in the chat or raise your hand. Sorry, Deb, did you raise your hand? Oh, okay. Patty.
Hi, thanks, Sable. This is Patty speaking. And many thanks to everybody who has, to all of our guests for sharing your words and really giving us a context that I think is really important. You know, as you heard me say earlier, I think as allies and maybe as co-conspirators, more importantly, I'm always mindful that reconciliation journeys can be a whole lot of talk and not a whole bunch of action. And I remember listening to Elder Casey Eagle speaker who said, you know, now is the time, it's the time for reconciliation. And so I wonder if you might have any thoughts or suggestions for those of us from the settler communities on how we might further the work of Indigenous artists and art forms that are being developed. Maybe there are conditions that are barriers, like in the audition process or the application process or the programming process that you've observed that we can change based on your experiences. Thanks, that's my final thought.
Thank you, Patty. I will turn that over to Cowboy, and then Kelly, and then Troy. So Cowboy.
Yeah, great question. I mean, there's a million ways to support Indigenous artists, and I think one of the main ones is to make connections. You know, a lot of us, I'm very fortunate, including everyone else on this panel, we have a broad network where we can be connected to anyone. You know, it's a phone call or a couple emails away, but there are a lot of young Indigenous artists who don't have that kind of access or that kind of support or that kind of network. So, you know, something as simple as connecting, you know, young up and coming artists to your network, you know, making them aware of something like this. I wish there were more, you know, young Indigenous eyeballs in this Zoom room with us today. And then just, you know, in terms of the process of applying for funding, I think the OPIP's done a great job making it very user friendly. All of the info sessions that have been set up by Sable and the crew, it's been a very good process of, you know, to build capacity within the community. I say keep that work up. Patience is definitely a virtue, especially with a lot of Indigenous artists who are transitioning from the reserve to the city. They don't have as much capacity as us urban Indigenous bougie natives do. So just as much support system as you possibly can, and connecting people. When we do get back to some kind of like normalcy, just showing up, buying tickets, even if it's a Zoom performance, check it out, spread the word. Visibility, it really does help. It goes a long way, and we appreciate everything that CADA has done. So just keep hooking us up. Swimukit, help us out. We need it.
Thanks, Cowboy. Kelly.
Yeah, that's a really great question, Patty. I think some of the things that I sort of reflect on immediately is, where are your artists coming from? First off, is it the project? Is it connected to Treaty 7? And, if it is, then maybe commissioning Treaty 7 artists, or specifically recruiting Treaty 7 artists to work on the project, so that, you're gathering the right and proper information. I think another thing too is recognizing education barriers. Sometimes the language is not accessible to Indigenous, our Indigenous patrons demographic that we're working with. And sometimes you have really, really amazing artists, but they lack that post-secondary Western education. But they might come with a wealth of, Indigenous knowledge that they carry, and, they're looked up as a knowledge keeper or a holder or an elder in their communities. And so recognizing, those sorts of layers, and that, sometimes our elders and our knowledge keepers are like 20 years old, and they have all of this knowledge because they've, it is a lived experience. And it's something that, that we're trying to get back, is, that idea of learning from our elders and our knowledge keepers. So I think just recognizing those sorts of things, that elders doesn't always necessarily mean that they're like senior age. And then understanding protocols of the different communities that you're working with. Troy alluded to that a lot. It's not just about giving tobacco, it's building that relationship, and it's making those connections within the communities. Because once you do that, there's this beautiful story that comes out of it. And, and you get to experience that. I know Sable has talked, has mentioned a lot of times where CADA team goes out to writing on stone. And that is like probably a perfect place to go and experience, because you get to see it, you get to feel it, you get to work directly with the land, and that connection is so important. And so those are the things that, for me, when I think of processes that we need to look at, is those three: is where are your artists coming from, understanding the protocols, and then understanding, the Indigenous or the education barriers, and what can you do to make it more accessible to the community. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kelly. Troy?
Hi. Thinking about the question, yeah, great question. And just thinking, I think it's both ways too, So I was like, how can I help you? And I go back to the experience of sitting across. I'll go back to Michael and our lunch, and he was so excited. He told me about this really wonderful experience that he had in Australia, where he really wanted to see a reenactment of the Waitangi Treaty, which is a treaty between the Queen and the Indigenous people. But he unfortunately couldn't make it because he had a performance on the other side of the city. So he was telling me this story, and he was sitting there, and he was talking about a reenactment. And he was talking about, what he wanted to do. And he really needed some guidance in this. He needed guidance. And I looked at him across the table and I said, I know what you need. You need to meet Narcissus Blood. Come on, jump in the car. And we drove. So it was mutually benefited in terms of how we need each other. Helping young artists. I mean, we had a wonderful partnership. Chet Skinner was the dean at the time, who was very instrumental. Dr. Shelley Scott, Lisa Doolittle, of course, in the Native American Studies department. We had the support of the department to bring the Center for Indigenous Theatre, a school I taught at in Toronto, together to join forces so that we can, recruit or give people a space where they can feel safe, where they feel like they can and again, like Kelly mentions, there's such a language barrier. There's such a barrier in terms of how things run in the Western world. I mean, like, I was 18, I left the reserve. my language and my nuances and everything was so different that I was in culture shock, and here I am, a brown boy like this, playing Jacques Du Bois and Adam in As You Like It, really wondering, like, is this it? My audition process was very, very safe in that I had Thomas Usher understand, so the more we understand about your environment, its Indigenous people, or even, the diversity of the people that we're servicing. And the good thing, especially with Sable now in her position and with her years of experience, she's also an artist and has a body of work, and something really great coming up for the Calgary community. That work is really important, and congratulations to Kata for establishing that. And in many institutions across Canada are starting to bring that resource in, who understands its community, that can turn around and teach our community about the Indigenous community. And so with that, with Thomas spending time in the Indigenous community out of his own interest, I believe, but he understood my insecurities coming into that world, but they wanted me, and I was freaked out, and I was scared coming from the reserve, going out there and not understanding the language, not understanding what it is that I was getting into, and it was all Western training, like in terms of Ibsen and Shakespeare and theater history, even Canadian theater history as well, on Turtle Island, American theater history, was taking the care and knowing that we want to develop this, and I was with Michelle Thrush and a few others out in Morley, and I said to Michelle, I said, when all these youth came storming into the youth center, I think Cowboy was with us at the time too, but I said to Michelle, I said, look at that group. Somewhere in there, there's a saxophone player. Someone in there, there's a poet, and we just need to give them a space, And we created, a space, which was the combination for Center for Indigenous Theatre and the University of Lethbridge. So we had the resources, we had the theater, state-of-the-art, place, and people working with us from the institution and the Indigenous instructors, so that they can have a place to develop and really have the opportunity to decide if that's what they want to do. And we've created, well, we didn't create, they've created themselves, but they had a space where they can flourish, and those kind of resources as they come are just incredible, and we're always trying to try. I just met another young artist, Tyson in Calgary, who's reaching out and looking for places to develop. I mean, the Indigenous, the Banff Center is open, the Indigenous Writing Program is open again. So these resources are becoming available. And with your resource person like Sable for Kata, understanding the community, we got to engage more and build those meaningful relationships. So we have an understanding of where people are coming from, and give them the opportunities and assist them, take the time to understand them and know where their strengths and weaknesses are, so that we can develop them, for the professional world of art.
Thank you so much for that, Troy. I think we have maybe time for one more question, and actually Patty had another question.
I do, but I don't want to take away from anybody. And for those of you who might have to leave the call, thank you very much. We are recording this conversation, as Melissa shared with us, so that you can come back and watch the recording if you can't stay on past our time here. Maybe as a little teaser, this question's a good one. It's a good question. And it's about the distinction between appropriation versus appreciation. And I know that in my conversations with many arts leaders, there's an uncertainty about that. And I thought that particularly all of you who have joined us to speak today may provide some insight for that. And I think you've touched on it even in your earlier responses about being aware, doing your own learning. But if there was anything else anyone wanted to add on that, that would be great. That's my final thought.
Yes, that is a really big question, and we've seen it so much in our community over the years. You know, from as big as you know, a situation that happened recently with the filmmaker, the CBC filmmaker, and Latimer and Boyden in literature. But yes, it's definitely something that we are always aware of. Cowboy, would you like to share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll try. It's very complicated, as you all know. I would say we need to point to the fact that we are dealing with a pan-Indigenous lexicon that will influence an individual's perception of Indigenous people, when from our own perspective, we understand and activate the nuances and specificity of our own cultures. Even within the Blackfoot Confederacy, the differences in cultural idiosyncrasies, accents, sense of humor, relationship to the land with the Piikani, the Gaina and the Siksika, Amskapa Piikani is very, it's very different. It's very nuanced. So I would say the best way to answer this question is it's a case-by-case basis where that nexus lives between appropriation and appreciation. Because we as Indigenous people, we've been kind of homogenized into this monolithic pan-Indian image. We have to try and find a way to discern our way through all of those idiosyncrasies and really identify. And I mean, it's up to the person who wants to appreciate or appropriate, whatever the case may be, to do their own homework and really understand the magnitude of, you know, the complexity of those cultural idiosyncrasies that exist within any type of feedback loop that might be being appropriated in some way. I could name a dozen, if not millions, of different examples of where it was blatant appropriation, and there are some examples that do exist of appreciation. But with appreciation, there should be no agency over the Indigenous whatever, whether it's a piece of art, whether it's a type of dance or a certain style. But I think most importantly right now, we do need to have these uncomfortable conversations about identity, appropriation of identity, because it's right now, you know, for that little window there, reconciliation, it was very cool, very hip to be Indigenous. But if you want to go down that road, you have to know that there's a lot of responsibility in, if you're going to claim a community, you know, that community has to claim you. You have to do the frontline work. You have to, you know, put in hours for that community if you're going to be saying you're from that community. And it's not easy work. We're dealing with so much crisis. We've been dealing with crisis since the treaties were signed, since before the treaties were signed. Now, I always say we're a post-apocalyptic people, and we're just finally welcoming people to the apocalypse with this recent pandemic. So very good question. I appreciate that question. And I have to say it's a case-to-case basis. It's very, very complicated.
Thank you, Cowboy. Kelly?
Sure, I'll give my stab at it. Just to add on, like, to what Cowboy was saying is, you know, I non-Indigenous people have to understand where our stories come from. They're so personal to us. Our songs, our language, you know, our designs, the things that we carry that identify who we are, whether we're Niitsitapi or Ojibwe or Anishinaabe, we all come from somewhere. And that those designs or those stories are a direct part of our identity. So what you're taking is our own self and you're monetizing something from it, which is completely unfair and very, very wrong on so many levels. And so, you know, when I had this question asked to me a few months ago, and I was kind of stumped on it, trying to figure out the best way to answer, what that was. And it took me a while to come to the answer because I had to go through sort of consultation or just conversation with elders about identity and about our designs and our stories. And when the elders had talked about that and where these specific things come from, it really rang true to me, because that's what it is. That's what you're appropriating. You're appropriating a family, a clan, a community, a person, and you're in turn monetizing and taking everything from them and calling it something your own when it's not, and you don't have any right to do that. And so for me, I always ask this one question is, if you're going to work with Indigenous person, Cowboy said, do your research, do your homework, make sure that they're connected to those communities, make sure that they have done ethical research themselves to gather, the stories or the information or whatever it is, the knowledge that they're trying to pass on, making sure that they've done that in the most ethical way. So it's whether or not you want something authentic. And, people will obviously just go to whatever is easiest, because being an Indigenous artist is not an easy thing to do, because there is so many conversations and consultation, before we even get to consent. Even for us, we have to go through the whole process. And so it's really unfair when you see others sort of skipping the line and going directly to the source without doing all of that work. But in our communities, we know who we are, and we know who are the ones that are doing the proper work, because it's also about preservation and protecting, those identities and those stories. And so I think it goes back to whoever's commissioning to the institutions, whether you want an authentic story or not, because you can easily go and appropriate something, and that's easy to do. But if you want something that has sustenance and something that's real, then you're going to do the proper way, and you're going to build those lines and alliances with those communities or with that person that you're working with. Thank you.
So true. Thank you for that, Kelly. Troy?
Hi. Loaded question, just even with appropriation and appreciation. The dangers of appropriation is, you don't want to become complicit in your own. Here's a quote, Troy, you come from somewhere, someplace, protect it. And those were words given to me by the late Dr. Joan Cardinal Schubert. And, at first, I was very young at the time, and then I started to realize what it was she was saying, even in my engagement with some of the projects that we're in, and hearing some of my colleagues who are non-Native and Native from other territories, when they hear the transcripts or they go online and they see, some of the work that we did, they say, like, even hearing Cowboy speak, I know that I'm home. I can hear the land speak with Leroy Little Bear, Narcissus Blood. When you hear those elders speak, you can hear the land. You can hear where you come from. Like, even with our own territory, dialects change. You know if you're from Upscott Bigani, which is Blackfoot stateside, or Siksika or Bigani, so there's those identities, and appropriation is robbery, and we need to, as artists, protect it. Like Kelly said, that process, it's our responsibility. It really is. Because our elders trust us. Our elders are proud of us, and they want to support the work that we're doing. But, I had this conversation with another artist a couple of days ago, and I said, and we've got to take that care. We've got to really, when we go into the community, and especially who we're collaborating with, so that our elders who are engaging know exactly and clearly what they're getting themselves involved in. That they are there, and every time I'm engaging in work, because I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to go to another community, and I don't know how to tell their story, because it's not my story. I tell my stories, and I always put a line item in my work, especially when I'm applying for grants, is that I need the elder advisor in the room with us during the time that we were there. And that was my recommendation for Narcissus. Narcissus even went out to get training at my school at the Center for Indigenous Theater because, they threw him on stage and all of a sudden he's so funny. He was at the BAM Center and he kept flashing his artist card. Look, Troy, look, Cowboy, look, Sable, I'm an artist. Oh my God, he was so hilarious. But anyway, those are the dangers. I mean, it can happen between Indigenous people, coming to it's not your story to tell, and there's protocols, as Kelly was talking about, and sometimes that can take, and in my example earlier, it can take weeks and even months, to get through. And that process, that is really, really important. I was working with a young dancer out in Grassy Narrows Reserve, and it's it was wonderful sitting there and meeting their elders. And I was brought in as a theater artist because he wanted to work with an Indigenous director and do the dramaturgy work. And so I was brought into that aspect, taking the backseat and meeting his community. And it was so lovely, and working across the country, even with the Mi'kmaq people and in Halifax, you can really appreciate, and this is the appreciation, you can really appreciate their land, their hospitality, how they operate, and their community and their relationship to the land. Being a guest in that community has to come with ultimate respect, but the appreciation and their hard work and what they do is absolutely amazing. And I'm blown away by I'm really gifted that I have, friends from across Turtle Island who invites me as a theater artist into their communities to work with them. But coming into a community and taking their stories, and without, Cowboy talked about nuances and language and stuff, without, if that's not in the work and you're not telling that story in the work, then we become complicit. And it's such a responsibility when you're putting the work out there, when you're putting it out there for the world to see. Sometimes I just don't get it, but we have to engage more. That's the whole responsibility of building meaningful relationships. So yeah, I hope that was a sort of just off the top of my head stab at the question, but yeah, I feel it's a very important question. It's something really important to investigate and navigate. So.
Thank you for that, Troy. Yeah, it's appropriation. It's like the foundation of Canada. I mean, Canada has appropriated land, appropriated so much. And I think that trying to go from appropriation to appreciation is a real struggle. And so we're all too familiar with appropriation. And so now I think we're only really beginning to see the appreciation. And so we still have a long ways to go, I think. But I think we're way over time now. And I would like to thank everyone for joining us. We do have our elder, Rose, who is going to close us with a song. And so Rose.
Okay. Yeah, I just wanted to, I really enjoyed listening. And one thing I see is, when we feel connection with other people wanting to know us as Native people, I find they put it out to learn our language. And so that's one sign we know, like, they were trying to connect with us is when they start trying to learn our language. And and with, connections with each other, like our brothers and our cousins, our brothers and our sisters, that connection was lost back then with the colonization. But in our mothers, our aunties are our mothers too. And so with Narcissus, I learned a lot from him with the Kainai studies. He's my close relative, so he could be, well, he's my brother too, because we grew up together. And so, you know, we have to bring that connection within our own Native communities, and then we're able to share more with, you know, the other people Creator put us here on earth with. So this song here, I thought I would sing. It's Creator, the sun is our creator. This is a Sundance song too, so it's like a prayer song too. I did my piercing Sundance back in 1991. And anyways, it says, the song goes, sun have pity on me, or, you know, bless me. There's different words, Gimmukit. It's hard to translate that word, but it's like, you know, like bless me or help me, you know. I'm going to have a new life. This is meant to be. And it's about right now, we want to make new changes, you know, how we have relationships with one another in a better way. Eh? So this is what I thought about this song to sing today for you, and to help us, you know, with what we're doing, with what Sable and all of you are doing. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much for that, Rose. It's a beautiful song. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you all for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Patty to end this, today's town hall.
Once again, many thanks to you, Sable, for hosting us and for putting this just remarkable group of people together. Elder Heavyhead, thank you so much for joining us today. Kelly, Troy, Cowboy, as always, you inspire me. And I love having these moments to hear from you. I know they are becoming fewer and fewer and far between in light of the demand on all of your time. So we appreciate you being with us here in community today. So many things that I learned coming from the conversation and then the comments that we heard today. I think maybe the biggest reminder to me and lesson is to be humble, to be open to learning more, to be curious, to be brave in admitting that maybe you don't know what you need to know in order to interact in a true and good way with Indigenous artists and artisans and others from particularly the Treaty 7 nations. I hope that Calgary Arts Development and Sable can be part of helping to build stronger connections and relations among settler arts communities and Indigenous arts community. And I look forward to the adventures that Sable will lead, not only Calgary Arts Development, but our arts community in her new role with us. There are 2 more town halls that we have scheduled. The next one is September 28th from 2 till 3:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, and it will be around the theme of racial equity. And then there will be a 3rd town hall on November 2nd, same time, 2 to 3:30 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time, focused on disability justice. Our great friend and teacher, J.D. Derbyshire, will be leading us through some of those conversations and inviting guests and knowledge keepers to join us on those conversations. And stay tuned, we may have more conversations ahead. More information and registration links can be found on our website, calgaryartsdevelopment.com. So please be sure to check or subscribe to our newsletter where we share all of this information. Thank you all again. And my final thing that I'd like to wish is to our friends and neighbors and families from the 2S LGBTQ plus communities, happy Pride. It is Pride Week here in Calgary. I hope that you take this time to celebrate in who you are and are surrounded by those who celebrate you every day, not just during Pride. So everyone be well and be safe and take care, and we'll see you soon. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.